2016. I have moved to a good home. I leave behind the ice house. Dan Andrews would rather I lived with an ice addict, and that you should too. For some, at the moment, the sex party has more credibility. From 2015, a so-called independent senator in New South Wales has forced an inquiry into the rental of poles and wires policy of the New South Wales Government. Fred Nile is grandstanding on the issue so as to know if the policy is in New South Wales' interests. It is worth some $300 billion to the New South Wales economy. The authority tasked with examining the policy to begin with had produced a document which failed to include some benefits of the policy. The Premier's office was alerted to it and reminded the authority to show due diligence. Now Baird has been asked if he has lent on the authority to produce a document unfavourable to the Australian Labor Party. But that is not what transpired, although it may well appear to be the effect. Naturally, news reports are suggesting Mr Baird has been highlighted acting in an underhanded way. For the second federal budget of Mr Hockey, due tomorrow, the media are spinning wildly to undermine it before it is seen. The opposition to it last year was successful due to a corrupt Senate. Responsible decisions have still been made by the government, but irresponsible opposition has been successful too. A meme being put around by the media is that Mr Hockey is tired. No doubt he is. Not only is he delivering a budget, but he is also suing the Sydney Morning Herald for bad journalism. That was also defamatory. If Hockey is tired, it is because of unfair demands on him while he is saving the nation. In 868, a copy of the Diamond Sutra was printed in China, making it the oldest known dated printed book. The book is about wisdom, and so it may not seem exciting to those who have delved in the Sutra oeuvre. In 1310, in France, 54 members of the Knights Templar were burned at the stake as heretics. They were viewed as being wealthy by a poor King Philip IV of France, who wanted their money and seized it. But they had lost all their real authority when they lost Jerusalem in 1187 to Saladin. In 1647, Peter Stuyvesant arrived in New Amsterdam to replace William Clift as Director General of New Netherland, the Dutch colonial settlement in present-day New York City. Peter literally made the world light up. In 1672, Louis XIV of France invaded the Netherlands. This provided a setting for the death of D'Artagnan as he became Marshal of France, as he was hit by a cannonball in Alexander Dumas' Man in the Iron Mask. In 1792, Captain Robert Gray became the first documented white person to sail into the Columbia River. Not many white people need documents these days. In 1812, Prime Minister Spencer Perceval was assassinated by John Bellingham in the lobby of the House of Commons, London. Bellingham had felt unfairly represented when he had been arrested in Russia and detained for 5 years as part of a shakedown involving insurance. Bellingham shot the PM as a proxy for a Russian counterpart. Bellingham was hanged for being a killer. Bellingham's wife became rich from charity as a result, and so she remarried. In 1813, in Australia, William Lawson, Gregory Blaxland, and William Wentworth led an expedition across the Blue Mountains, west of Sydney. Their route opened up inland Australia for continued expansion throughout the 19th century. About 20 years earlier, some convicts had fled Sydney Colony, moving north, hoping to walk to China. One lives in hope. In 1857, Indian Rebellion of 1857, Indian rebels seized Delhi from the British. Less than 100 years later, India was free. In 1880, 7 peoples were killed in the Muscle Slough tragedy, a gun battle in California. It pitched railroads versus settlers. In 1891, the Otsu incident, Svarich Nicholas Alexandrovich of Imperial Russia, later Nicholas II, suffered a critical head injury during a sword attack by a Japanese policeman, Suda Sanzo. He was rescued by Prince George of Greece and Denmark. The policeman was not sentenced to death, but a patriotic seamstress cut her own throat as penance. The policeman died from a disease in prison later that year. Nicholas had the 9-centimeter scar for the rest of his life. No motivation for the attacks of the policeman are known. In 1927, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science was founded. In 1942, William Faulkner's collections of short stories, Go Down Moses, was published. In 1949, Siam officially changed its name to Thailand for the second time. The name had been in use since 1939, but was reverted in 1945. In 1960, in Buenos Aires, Argentina, 4 Israeli Mossad agents captured fugitive Nazi Adolf Eichmann, who was living under the alias of Ricardo Clement. 1963, racist bombings in Birmingham, Alabama disrupted nonviolence in the Birmingham campaign and precipitated a crisis involving federal troops. 1967, Andreas Papandreou, a Greek economist and socialist politician, was imprisoned in Athens by the Greek military junta. In 1973, citing government misconduct, Daniel Ellsberg had charges for his involvement in releasing the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times dismissed. 1885, Bradford City Stadium fire. 56 spectators died and more than 200 were injured in a flash fire at Valley Parade football ground during a match against Lincoln City in Bradford, England. 1987, Klaus Barbie went on trial in Lyon for war crimes committed during World War II. 1987, in Baltimore, Maryland, the first heart-lung transplant took place. The surgery was performed by Dr. Bruce Reitz of the Stanford University School of Medicine. In 2010, David Cameron became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom following talks between the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats to form the UK's first coalition government since World War II, after elections produced a hung parliament.